Here comes the sun, little darling. Here comes...
Well, welcome back to Voices from the Front Lines. This is your host, Eric Mann. Again, very happy to be back doing the show. And today our guest is Aris Anagnos, who many of you know. He's also been on the show before. We're going to be talking about, with his 90th birthday coming up, a sort of a retrospective of his life and also his future thoughts about where his life is going. I want to start in ancient Greece because, as you pointed out, my life began 2,500 years ago in ancient Greece when my namesake, Aristides, was threatened with ostracism. So one of my questions is that you grew up in an affluent, cosmopolitan family with a great sense of capitalist ingenuity. Your father seemed to be a brilliant businessman and kept landing on his feet as many times as he could in the middle of all these crises. They often landed on their feet in the midst of war, poverty, and suffering. But how did that issue of growing up in privilege, exposed to so many different languages and cultures, but then also the impact of the Great Depression, the suffering of others, how did that impact your life for better or worse?
Well, it did, and of course all of Greek history did, and modern Greek history. But I became aware of the abuse of power very young. I was 13 years old when a dictatorship was proclaimed in Greece by a former general, Metaxas, and I could see the abuse of power by the dictatorship. So all my life, in a sense, I've been fighting the abuse of power by those in power.
But that doesn't explain your unique biography, because as your father told you, Aris, there are exploiters and exploited, and I think it's better to be an exploiter because there's more money on that side. So why did you not choose that side in the war?
My father didn't know that he was spouting a pure Marxist philosophy.
He just thought he was giving you good advice, right?
He thought he was giving me good advice. But I felt, because we were privileged and we were better off and there was so much poverty around us, I felt I had to fight poverty, because I felt from that age on that it was unfair for me and for my family to be so much better off than the people around us.
So is there anything you can think of, besides your DNA and your moral decisions, were there any events in your life that you think a light bulb went off besides seeing the suffering of others?
Well, of course, I lived through the Second World War, and I lived through the German occupation, the Nazi occupation of Greece, after Mussolini attacked Greece. And of course, there are three great periods of Greek history. There's the classic Greek history, there's the Byzantium, and then there is the modern Greek history when Greece re-emerged as a modern country in 1821 after fighting the Ottoman Empire. And so there is a tradition of independence in Greece, independent spirit. And of course Greece, after the First World War, was sort of a semi-protectorate of the British,
right,
under the control of the British, through financial control primarily. And all of those things sort of made me object as a Greek to being semi-controlled by a foreign power, in this particular case, England, before the war. And then came the occupation, and I saw the atrocities that the Nazis committed. I saw the famine, I saw people starving in the streets, and the dead bodies being collected in the morning every day by horse-drawn carts, because there were no vehicles. The Germans had confiscated all the vehicles that were serviceable. And then I managed to escape from Greece and joined the Greek forces of the Middle East. And that is where I became really radicalized.
So is it fair to say that in many ways you grew up in a somewhat subjugated nation, and that gave you some empathy with other nations that are subjugated all over the world?
Yes, that contributed, certainly. And also in the Middle East, I saw directly the effects of colonialism. I saw British colonialism, French colonialism, Italian colonialism. Of course, the most ruthless of the three was the British colonialism. But all, of course, were ruthless if anybody asked for independence.
Let's go back to the concentration camp. So you led a mutiny. You were 19 years old. You disarmed your officer. You thought that you were going to rise up and topple the monarchy in Greece, but instead you ended up in a concentration camp. What happened after that?
Well, after that, after the British established, the British fought a resistance in Greece. In fact, they withdrew troops from the Italian campaign to fight the Greek resistance. And there was a Battle of Athens which lasted 33 days. And the British bombed the working class areas of Athens, something even the Germans hadn't done.
A couple of things you said I thought were interesting. One is that the British were more afraid of the Greek left than the Nazi right and the fascist right in Italy. They, as the story you told, is that they moved troops away from fighting in Italy to try to suppress a democratic Greek revolution. Is that correct?
That's correct. Because Churchill had the ultimate goal of destroying the Soviet Union.
Take us to El Salvador for a minute, and with you and Karen again. Any stories there? What did you learn there? What were some of the experiences you had there?
Well, we made several trips. The first one actually was when we were asked, and this was in 1984, a contact of the FMLN. I was at that time president of an organization called the Humanitarian Law Project.
Right.
And we were asked to go look for a student leader, Claudina Calderon, who had been kidnapped in the streets of San Salvador
Right.
and had disappeared. But somebody thought that he had seen her in the jail of the Policía Nacional, the National Police. And so the request was to go and try to find her in the National Police jail. So we got letters from Alan Cranston and Tony Bielenson and Paul Sarbanes and senators and members of Congress we knew, and we went to San Salvador. And there the ambassador's secretary said, ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry. We had a group of 10 people, 4 women and 6 men. The ambassador is very busy, he can't see you. I said, but we have all these letters from senators and members of Congress that we have to give them a report. So the ambassador Pickering saw us, and he said, the new chief of police is a friend of mine. So come tomorrow, and in the vehicles of the embassy, we'll go to the National Police and talk to him. And the men have to wear a tie and be very official. So we went the next day, and the chief of police was very courteous because we had letters from Congress. And he said, you can search my building, and if you find Claudina, you can take her with you. And we searched it for 2 hours, and we didn't find her. What we didn't know was number one, she was dead, but they had killed her. But there was a subterranean passage to the jail of the National Police, and we didn't discover that passage. But when we came back, Carolyn sent him some pictures to the chief of police, and we got an official letter on the stationery of the National Police with sabers and cannon and flags, all these symbols of power, saying, queridos amigos, dear friends, it was great to meet you. Anytime you're in El Salvador, I'm at your disposal. And this was a letter we used the next year when we went up into the mountains to meet the leadership of the guerrillas, because we waved that letter through all the military posts we had to pass, and they let us pass. We had no safe conduct or permission from the military. So this letter from the chief of police from the previous year was our safe conduct. And that's how we got to the mountains.
Well, that's a very good organizer, because he just sent you basically a gratuitous thank you and I hope I never see you again. And you took the letter and looked at it as if it was an official invitation to come back. You took him at his word, right?
Right.
So that's very, very clever.
So that's when we came back with a peace proposal, which the Reagan administration ignored.
Is remorse anything that operates in your psyche?
Well, I still have that burning feeling for justice, fighting injustice. For example, to have the Congress cut off or reduce food stamps
Right.
is a crime. And it should be obvious to anybody it's a crime. But these people are people haters. They hate the poor, they hate the seniors, they hate the students, they hate the immigrants, they hate the women, they hate everybody. They're people haters. And they call themselves the conservatives or the Tea Party.
Right.
They should call themselves the People Hater Party.
Aris, what would you say in your last minute is your most hopeful thought for yourself for the next 10 years?
Well, I can't stop doing what I'm doing, which is fighting injustice. And that's what I've dedicated my whole life, and that's what I will continue doing as long as my health permits it and my personal resources permit it.
Here comes the sun, little darling. Here comes the sun.